Today's episode is brought to you by beer. Beer. It's a drink. Okay, so we've already covered the fight for Casa Fanella and Casa Riposa, basically, including the beginning of the attack, the opening of hostilities, all the way up until I dropped some artillery directly on top of Bletchley Geek's head in a rather fortunate timing, as he explained on the forum thread. He had basically assembled his troops in position, getting ready to launch the second wave of his attack that would carry him up the hill and into Casa Riposa, when my artillery came down on his head. So it had a pretty significant effect. I still haven't gone over the turns from his perspective yet, mostly because I don't want to have too many spoilers for myself as I do this after-action review. However, since this part is already done, what we're going to do today is we're going to move over here and we're going to take a look at the battle for Casa d'Antonio. And I figure what I would do first is let's take a look at the objective itself. As you can see, we have a large two-story building right here, with windows facing this way and this way, basically running west to east, I guess, or just front and back. Then you have a large house over here with some windows on the second story looking outwards, but the first story doesn't really have any windows at all in it. So you have kind of an elevated fighting position up here. You have a bit of cover on the ground floor. And over here, it's much the same. You can see windows only on the front side of this building facing outwards. It's clear that the scenario designer wanted to prevent... I'm fairly certain, unless that's supposed to be a barn or something, but I'm pretty sure having windows only on one side of a building is done on purpose. There's a small little shack-type building to the rear of the large main one here, and then there is a double-sided shack, a double-wide shack over here. And when you look at the objective itself, you can see that an approach from the enemy side of the map can be conducted really only down one or maybe two routes. That is, through these tall trees below the objective right here, heading straight up towards the ground floor of the building. It's really only covered by these two windows on the second floor up here, and a very small window in each shack over here, so it's actually a fairly safe approach route. If you can set up a base of fire against the upstairs of this building over here, you could theoretically just move right through these trees and into the ground floor. Maybe if you had a breach team, you could breach the ground floor, which would suppress everybody in the building. You could run in the building, shoot everybody, and then you have a convenient second floor perch with windows facing in multiple directions out of the top of this building anyway, that would allow you to dominate this position. So when I was planning my defense, the only other real approach route is down this kind of shrubbery type bush thing, but it's not really an approach route. The only reason I say it's an approach route is because in climactic conditions and time of day that we're fighting in at night with snow, even something with as little cover as this actually turns into an approach route, as you'll see very shortly. So my planning for the defense of Casa d'Antonio took two different steps, right? First of all, you look at Casa d'Antonio in relation to the entire Axis side of the map here, and there is one thing that jumps out at you right away, and that is Casa d'Antonio has almost no relation to the rest of my defense. As you can see, these are the positions. I mean, I know we're a little bit further in, but these are the positions of my defense. This is where I'm considering things to be critical. Basically, it forms an entire circle around Casa d'Antonio. Casa d'Antonio itself has a single machine gun section in it, and that's it. And the reason for that is I did not consider Casa d'Antonio to be a particularly important objective. The terrain itself that it occupies is not particularly important. It doesn't offer any critical advantage to one side or another, especially if you look over here at Casa Fanella and Casa Riposa. If you're able to push yourself up through Casa Riposa, you gain access to the backside of the map over here, which is guarded by a large ridge. It gives you two different covered approach routes you could potentially use to move on Casa Fanella. So that's a critical kind of piece of terrain that you need to cover. And far out here on the left, Masseria Emilia over here, if you were able to neutralize that or capture it, you could then move into the back of the map, which gives you somewhat of a covered route screened by these trees onto Casa Fanella. So Masseria Emilia is also pretty important. However, Casa d'Antonio, if the enemy manages to capture it and they don't hold anything else, and they're not making a move for anything else, if Bletchley Geek's primary attack had gone straight into Casa d'Antonio, it wouldn't have really gained him anything. He would have a victory location, sure, that's worth a few points, but, I mean, overall, the balance of my defense would not have been obstructed by the enemy capturing Casa d'Antonio. So I decided, in my planning phase, I put a TRP here, as I did on every single objective, but I decided not to waste any of my actual infantry troops, the rifle platoons. I decided not to waste any of them defending Casa d'Antonio, so that's the reason why the only thing you see here is a couple of machine gun teams and a single HQ team low down in the little shack behind the main building. But one thing I did want to do was use Casa d'Antonio as a position from which I could provide attrition against enemy forces. So if you zoom in on these trees right here, you can see I placed anti-personnel minefields covering the length of the trees widthwise, and there's another minefield right over here. So if the enemy does decide to move through these trees as an approach route, not only are they going to be stopped by the barbed wire and are forced to stop and breach it if they want to get through it, but they're also going to run smack dab into the anti-personnel mines. Now, the thing is that I'm not 100% sure if Bletchley Geek even put any troops in those trees to begin with. Maybe he dissevered the mines, maybe... I don't even know if he knew they were there. But that'll be something for him to answer on the forum thread. What was his reasoning behind the particular approach he took to Casa d'Antonio? But one thing I wanted to do was make sure that Bletchley Geek could not come through the trees and straight up against the base of the building, and then maybe use an engineer team to blast into the building, because Casa d'Antonio, if he was able to do that, it would have been lost without a fight at all. And just because I decided not to waste a lot of resources defending it, doesn't mean I want to make it easy for the enemy to capture. So I was determined to use the limited resources I had in as effective a manner as possible. So to that end, I blocked off the wooded approach to the main building with barbed wire, and as you can see, I also ran the barbed wire across the face of this little shack over here, just to make sure that it wasn't sticking out, that it wasn't hanging out in the air, and the enemy could just run around the end of it and still make it in here. I ran it right up against the edge of the building, so if he's going to breach this wire, he has to do it in a position that I can see him. And secondly, I ran my wire all the way down around here, and I put a little dogleg on it, basically just forcing the enemy, if he wants to go around the wire, he has to come into this wide open area out here, which is directly under the muzzle of my heavy machine gun team, which is in this building over here. You might also have noticed I put a minefield out here, kind of, I thought for a minute, and I'm like, okay, if the enemy is going to bypass my defenses around to the left, he's probably going to want to use a few pieces of natural cover that are out here, say the trees or some bushes or something. So I put a few extra minefields out here next to this tree over here. I put some next to this tree over here, and I put some next to this tree over here. Basically figuring that if his troops were to suddenly get shot at, and the TAC AI makes them use the take cover command, they might end up running straight over to the tree, and then they would get hit by the mines. At least that was the idea. It didn't actually work out that way, but as you can see, my minefields actually extended quite far out into this open area out here. Alright, so my mines extended out to these trees, and then the very far end of that is anchored by another heavy machine gun team. But honestly, we're starting to get into the area of Masseria Emilia, and this heavy machine gun team itself is going to be part of the fighting, but also part of a different action that's going to take place. So, as you can see, the left side approach to Casa d'Antonio is fairly well covered. We've got minefields underneath the trees in areas they might take cover. The barbed wire forces the enemy out into the open where my heavy machine guns can easily fire on him over here. And then I have a heavy machine gun team up here that can fire down into this position. And then I have a heavy machine gun over here that can fire crosswise into this position here. So I've set up a pretty good kill zone out here with mines and heavy machine guns covering it. I have a significant obstacle to the front of Casa d'Antonio with the barbed wire and the minefield stretching across the trees. And then the only thing that's left is this open area off to the right. And if you'll notice, the open area off to the right, I wasn't too worried about the enemy utilizing this area for pretty much anything. First of all, it's wide out in the open, which basically screams kill zone to anybody who looks at it. And secondly, I had a heavy machine gun team in the corner of this wall here. I have a heavy machine gun team behind this wall over here. Heavy machine gun team here. I have a mortar section behind the wall over here. Basically, if the enemy was to try to advance through this open area, they're going to run into heavy machine gun teams. High explosive mortar ammunition will be lobbed at them very quickly. And then I have a convenient rifle platoon sitting back here on the road, ready to move in and counterattack in this direction. So I wasn't too worried about this open area off to the right. It's basically a no-go zone pretty much for either side, honestly. But we'll also get more into that later. So the specific placement of my teams in Casa d'Antonio is rather simple. This heavy machine gun team up here under Auto, I have no idea what rank that is, don't ask. They're semi-deployed upstairs at the top of the house. Basically what it means is the gunner can spot a target, choose to engage it, he will go prone, put the machine gun out in front of him on its bipod, and then he will fire off a burst. I did not want to deploy it onto its tripod just in case the enemy came from a different direction and I needed to redeploy the team on the upstairs floor. Because one thing to note is that when you put a infantry team into a building, I think I mentioned this before, but your actual deployment time goes up astronomically. As you can see down here, the deploy time says 2.3 minutes. So I don't want to have the machine gun deployed in a position, think, oh crap, the enemy's coming from this side actually, I need to shift the gun over to this side of the building, and have it take, 3 minutes to move across and then reset up. So that's one nice thing about the German HMG teams is they have this semi-deployed state that allows them to fire from wherever they're at. And as you can see, this team in the two-story building, let me finish talking about them first, they're over here covering this open area down here, including this kind of, I think it's supposed to be a riverbed or something, like a dry riverbed, and all the way up to the bushes in front of the trees over here. They can cover this direction and the end of the barbed wire over here easily. This machine gun team over here, their whole job is to cover this kind of bush approach route over here, or if the enemy did come through the trees over here and tried to go around the end of these sheds, these guys would be sitting here just waiting for them to pop out into the open. And then finally, because I believe HQ teams should do their share of the fighting, these guys are in this small shack behind the main building, and their job is basically just to look out in this direction and use their rifles and submachine guns on anybody out here. So that's basically the defense of Casa d'Antonio. I have a machine gun looking out in this direction, I have a machine gun looking in this direction, I have an HQ team covering the short approach straight into the open side of the complex. So let's see how well that defense did as I push play and we take a look at the action. So at the end of the first 60 seconds, we can already see how well the defense of Casa d'Antonio has gone. The machine gun team upstairs in this building on the left ended up spotting an enemy team out here in the open field. They were firing upon the my team in the building at Casa Fanella, or maybe they were firing on one of my teams who was withdrawing from the stone wall over there. And my MG42 team in the upstairs of this building decided to engage them. So they opened fire across the field in that direction towards the enemy team, which caused enemy troops that had moved up this bush path over here to very close range of this building. They immediately detected them and opened fire, killing 2 guys outright in the upstairs. As you can see, the leader and the gunner, who was it? It was one of the regular troops and somebody not on this list. That's weird. I don't know, whoever that guy is anyway. The team quickly became suppressed. They panicked. They decided to exit the building. 2 more guys were shot out front, and the remaining 2 individuals of the team are now running for their lives across the open ground back here. The machine gun team in the 2nd floor of this building spotted... Initially, they did not detect any of the enemies out here or anything. It was only when these guys in the bush path over here began shooting that they detected them from one of these side windows, and they immediately ran over and started shooting at them from this position, which caused enemy teams across the riverbed over here to detect them on the upper floor and begin laying down small arms fire. Looks to me like maybe a squad or 2, maybe even 3 squads, so probably a platoon is sitting out here. Looks to me like they've been keeping their eye on the building for some time, just hoping to spot somebody. And then finally, the platoon HQ in this small little shed down here has spotted enemies in the bush path over here and immediately engaged them with submachine gun and rifle fire. As you can see, 2 of them are down, 1 is dead, 1 is wounded. The platoon commander, though, Mr. Austerman, is busily firing away with his MP40, and honestly, I wish I had given him more ammunition, because his conduct in the upcoming engagement is going to be rather noteworthy. So, as far as the first 60 seconds have gone, whatever planned defense I had of Casa d'Antonio has already come apart. This machine gun team over here is fully suppressed, they're rattled, they're going to evacuate their position from the 2nd floor back down to the 1st floor. But one thing to note is, after observing the situation over here just for the first 60 seconds, I already come to several conclusions. First of all, the enemy teams that you can see out here, and as you can see there is one team way out here that is currently being engaged by one of my heavy machine gun teams, but like I said, we'll come back to that later. I immediately come to a decision. First of all, this riverbed and open area over here, I'm not going to worry about it, right? There are enemies over here, they are firing into the 2nd story of this building, but honestly, if I get my guys off the 2nd floor and down to the 1st floor, I don't need to worry about any enemies that are in this position, because the only way they can attack Casa d'Antonio is come around the end of the wire and into the open, where, as I said, I already have machine gun teams over here pre-positioned to do exactly what they're doing, and that is to stop any further advance. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to worry about is the enemies that are right up here in this bush path. So to that end, I need to immediately redeploy the heavy machine gun team downstairs and into a position where they can fire out in this direction. The platoon leader will continue engaging from his position in this small building, and then as soon as I can get these guys back, I mean, they are panicked, but they're not broken. As soon as I can get these guys back into some semblance of order, I'm going to have them do something useful. And it also leaves me the option, as you can see back here, I have several infantry teams just kind of standing by, not really doing anything but twiddling their thumbs. There's no reason why I cannot cannibalize some of my reserves back here and create some kind of reaction force to what's going on over here. So we're going to continue with the next turn. Keep that in mind. As I said before in one of my previous videos, you look at the situation over here, and yes, it looks bad. It looks bad. In fact, if you were the machine gun section leader, if you were Osterman over here, what is he, a lieutenant? I don't know what that rank badge is. If you were Osterman over here and you were in charge of this machine gun section, you would be thinking that this is an absolute disaster. But things over here are not going to go the way you expect. But we're going to continue that in a moment.